Recently, we hit 200,000 AENpeeps on this channel, which is mind-blowing to me. And there are a lot of questions that I see all the time in comments that I try and get to as many as I possibly can, but some of them just require a little bit more breakdown than just a response in a comment. I mean, you guys know me, I'm not just going to give you an answer and not tell you the reason why. So today, in celebration of 200,000 subscribers, I'm going to be going through some of your questions that you guys asked me on Instagram. Okay, so many European diets are high carb, low protein. How does that work for them and not us? This is a very interesting question because it kind of brings up the state of nutrition science and how poor it is. You wouldn't think that just understanding what people eat should be such a difficult question to answer, but it really is. I mean, let's look at the different methods that we typically use for looking at how we assess what people eat. One very common one is a food frequency questionnaire. Try taking one of these yourself online. See if you feel like it's an accurate depiction of what you actually eat in a day. They often have things like, how many times per week do you eat vegetables? And how many servings per week do you eat dairy? Like, most of us either are not really great at assessing how much we really eat or even having the memory or recall for what we ate. Now, one interesting thing that typically in places that do have higher carbohydrate diets, they tend to not be from sugar. And that's something that's really important to note because sugar is one of the biggest causes of that insulin spike. But there has even been research showing that as these communities that maybe are more traditional, that did have maybe a higher carbohydrate diet, as some of the more sugar dense foods become available to them, that these newer generations or younger generations that are consuming less of the traditional diet end up going along the same path as the United States in terms of obesity. So certainly processed carbohydrates, processed sugars are one of the biggest problems that we can see is unified across the world. And unfortunately, in a lot of nations where we have bigger cities, we have access to a lot of these really refined high sugar types of foods that we don't really necessarily think about. Protein bars, sugary lattes, those are some of the most obvious ones. Condiments that have a lot of sugar sneakily added in. These are all things that a lot of these other nations that perhaps even had a higher carbohydrate diet, but it was more whole food based where the insulin response is not going to be as high, doesn't have or didn't have. But another thing I did want to note too is that there is a very controversial history in terms of what it is that most countries eat and assessing that. I mean, I first noticed this personally when I did study abroad in Italy, studying the Mediterranean diet, studying what they ate. We had these two sections broken up where the first half of the day was studying the science and the research. It was mostly epidemiological, which means you can't have cause and effect when you are just studying these trends. And then the second half of the day was actually learning how these cultures ate. So learning the recipes from this little old Italian grandma who I loved. I wanted to just hang out with her all day. And they would actually teach us the traditional meals that were made. And I noticed that there's a really big discrepancy between what we were learning that people ate versus what was really eaten. There are a few books that kind of dive into this whole history of the world of nutrition and what people actually eat. Eventually, I want to try and get both of the authors on the channel so that they can break it down. I mean, they will easily know more of the history than me. They've dived really into it. But it is important to note that even just understanding what people eat in a day is controversial. We don't necessarily know what everyone eats in a day, let alone what a whole country typically eats. There's a lot more to this topic. It literally fills entire books, but that's just a good thing to keep in mind and to note when we are comparing, other countries to United States, to the UK, to Australia. Okay, so another question, this is kind of a little bit more of what we typically talk about, but it is a question I get a lot, so I want to make sure we address this. So 16A IF break fasted at 12 p.m. What time is optimal for weight loss for lunch and dinner? So first of all, I typically don't like to look at break fast as the determiner of when your eating window will be. Most of us have control of when we can eat our first meal. It's usually dinner that's the one that's set in stone that, we eat with family members, we eat with friends. And that cultural component around food and being able to interact with others when you're eating is hugely important for that long-term success. I mean, feeling isolated in what you're doing is one of the worst things you can do when you are trying to make a lifestyle change. You want to feel like you can actually do this long-term term, not just for a quick fix. So when it comes to determining an eating window, what I typically like to do is look at your dinner and when you're able to eat dinner and then counting backwards from there. Whether you're doing an 8-hour eating window, 10-hour, it doesn't really matter. Just making sure that you're first assessing when you can eat dinner and then adjusting your other meals within that window based off of that dinner. Okay, this might be a long video. Okay, do you have guidelines around daily fat intake in terms of grams? The only type of guideline in terms of counting that I will even loosely recommend is looking at your protein intake, because protein is the one thing that we do need to make sure we're getting enough of each day, because we need those essential amino acids to build hormones, to build our cells, to build muscle. And even that is still a loose number. It's not like you need to hit a specific number every single day. Our needs may change on a daily basis, but you can at least get a rough idea of this. I've done a video on this topic specifically, which you can check out right here. But in terms of grams of fat, I usually like to look at this as more of a adjustment type of food. So this is the food that you can use to adjust your daily hunger levels. You know, for example, if I had a extremely tough workout and I know that I need a little bit more satiating foods, I'll add in a little bit more of those fats. But if it's been a very busy work day, I haven't even really been hungry, I'm not going to prioritize adding in very many added fats because I don't really need that much for that day. And in order to get to this point of really being able to listen to your body, it can take a little bit to just be able to understand it. I mean, this is like a shameless plug, but this is literally why I created the complete intermittent fasting bundle, to help you to be able to determine how you can listen to your body, what you need, and some guidelines to go from there first, as well as the different foods you can incorporate and add in depending on your needs for that day. So if you first need help on figuring that component out, then I would really recommend checking out the complete intermittent fasting bundle. Have that link down in the description below. But using fat as your moving piece that you can have change each day depending on your hunger levels is a really good way to look at it. All right, thoughts on fish oil. You guys might not know this, I really don't like fish. I've tried so many times to like it. I'm actually in the process of really trying to like fish.
What's the verdict?
I wouldn't actively go out and eat this for something I enjoy, but to get my omega-3s in, at least that one bite was tolerable. Because it does have so many great benefits, but it's disgusting. Which is why the idea of fish oil is very intriguing to me personally, but in the world of supplements, there are a lot of scary things going on. I mean, first of all, we have to consider that fish oils are a unsaturated fat. Omega-3s, that's one of the main benefits from it, which means that it can interact with the air more. It can become rancid easier, and ultimately rancid oils, no matter if it's going to be that omega-3 or not, are only going to increase your risk for inflammation. So you could be taking an omega-3 fish oil, think you're getting all those anti-inflammatory benefits, the DHA, the EPA, all that great stuff. But if it's a low quality type of fish oil, then it could also be working against what you're trying to achieve. Now, because fish oil is very popular, I think because there are a lot of people like me who don't love fish, you need to make sure that you are getting a high quality, really great fish oil. Otherwise, if you already eat fish, there's not really that much of a need to have fish oil. If you're having fish 2 to 3 times per week, especially if it's a fatty fish where you are getting those omega-3s, the DHA, the EPA, then you don't really need to be taking omega-3s. There is some really interesting research in terms of having omega-3s if you are an athlete, for example, especially if you're like a football player or someone where you are getting more inflammation from impact with your sport. Omega-3s added into your diet can be really beneficial for bringing down inflammation in those more extreme situations. But generally speaking, most of us can get by just having some really high quality fish instead. ACV sipper. Do you think walking more than an hour a day is bad for your cortisol levels? Generally speaking, no. The more that you can get walking outside, it's just a better type of exercise to keep the heart rate down, to keep the cortisol levels down, and being outside, you're exposed to the negative ions, which has been found to help to get that cortisol level a little bit lower as well. I mean, really with walking, it's really hard to overdo it unless you have an injury. Of course, if you have some type of knee problems and you can't really go walking, then that's just going to cause more harm than good. But most of us aren't really going to get an excessive amount of walking in that could even cause that problem with cortisol. Now, one thing that is really important to consider is that we do need to make sure that you are getting that high quality sleep. ultimately walking is only going to do so much if you get poor quality sleep and you wake up the next day with those higher levels of cortisol as a result. I mean, everything kind of really starts with sleep, which is why everything that we do should be optimizing our sleep. I mean, we really don't consider sleep. Most people don't, and we think of it almost as optional. But it's really important to remember that that is where our body resets. That is where we actually repair our body, repair our internal systems, improve our muscle recovery, improve our immune system. That's where all that recovery happens, because during the day, our body's focused on all the other activities that we're doing, thinking, eating, digesting, exercising. So it doesn't have time to really repair during the day. So I know this is kind of like a side tangent from the walking question. So to answer that one, no, walking 1 hour a day or more than 1 hour a day shouldn't be a problem at all, unless you have an injury. I mean, especially if we consider walking only 1 hour, it's only going to be around 6,000 or 7,000 steps. But if you are concerned about cortisol levels, it's really important that you are looking at your sleep. I also have a ton of videos on this right here. Is organic the same as grass-fed? No. Moving on. Just kidding. Organic just really means that you're not using pesticides, that you're not using herbicides, etc., which is important. But grass-fed is kind of like this additional layer. It addresses what the animal's eating, not just how the food it's eating is treated. So organic, it could be grass-fed. It also could be that it's grain-fed. And that does make a big difference on the quality of the meat itself. Grass-fed literally means those animals are eating grass. And for those ruminant animals like cows, that is what they're meant to be eating. And so this is going to be a little bit of a tangent, but this is the type of thing that kind of bothers me about the state of our food system, is that the way that things originally were supposed to be, so traditionally the cows did eat grass, but we add on these terms as if that's not the norm, as if that's not the way that it should be. I think we need to flip the whole system on food. I mean, this is really radical, but instead of having it be grass-fed organic, that's what we should first assume that anything is going to be, and then add on those additional names for the foods that aren't. So instead calling it conventional, grain-fed, because I think it just gives eating the right types of foods that support your body, support your wellness goals, kind of a negative mental picture, because it seems like we're constantly adding on these names, and it almost seems ridiculous when we type this all out. I mean, if I'm typing out a recipe and I'm talking about Greek yogurt, I have to type out full fat, grass-fed, organic Greek yogurt, when really it should just say Greek yogurt, because each of those add-ons is really just originally how that dairy product is supposed to be. Other dairy products remove the fat. Normally fat would be in there, but we add it on because the norm now is to remove that fat component. Grass-fed is how the cows are supposed to eat, but it's not the norm right now. So it's added on as how we refer to various dairy products. Organic, just explain that. So you can see this one's a little bit of a pet peeve for me, just with the food industry, not with you guys. It can be confusing, so I'm glad that I can explain this to you. But yeah, so answering your question, grass-fed, organic, not the same thing. They can come together. You can have organic and grass-fed, but organic doesn't necessarily mean grass-fed. Just means that it's not using some of those pesticides, herbicides, etc., but it still could be a grain-fed cow. There's so many questions on here, and I want to be able to get to every single one, but this video will literally be a 3-hour video. Do you use sweetener ever? I like Lakanto monk fruit, but I don't see you mention any. So this is kind of like a personal, you have to see how you personally react and respond to these sweeteners. So I've done a video in the past on how even these non-nutritive sweeteners can still spike your insulin. Not in everyone, but it still can. And I've shared Katie's story in the past on how when she completely removed all of these non-nutritive sweeteners without doing anything else, she was very suddenly and very easily able to achieve her goals. But it doesn't mean that you can never have a sweetener. I mean, I'll use a little bit of honey or maple syrup in like those PB and chocolate chip cookies that I make. I also use a little bit of monk fruit in the chocolate bomb bites from the 21-day IVE program. But to be honest, I personally don't crave these as much anymore because I have started to really limit them, because personally, I've noticed a lot of really great benefits from just not having them very frequently. Everybody's body is going to be different on how you react to this and how your body responds to these sweeteners, but generally less is going to be more. And not just in terms of weight loss, a big thing I noticed is when I started to reduce even these higher quality sweeteners, my breakouts are really diminishing. In fact, I was recently with my brother and his wife and their kids' birthday was going on. So, we had a little bit of dessert, and it wasn't even a crazy type of dessert. We had some of these homemade chocolate truffles that were lower in sugar. I think something had honey or maple syrup in it. And yeah, I definitely indulged in them, and I noticed the next day that I received breakouts. So personally, I just don't even really like to eat a lot of these sweeteners anymore unless it is going to be more of a treat or a celebration, or unless I just really need it. there are those times. But yeah, so I definitely have used these before. I think there's higher quality ones and better options for overall wellness goals. Like, of course, using high fructose corn syrup or some of these other more refined and processed types of sugars just generally are not going to be a good idea. But you have to find that tolerance for yourself where you can get that happy medium of including some amount of that higher quality sugar, but still achieving your goals, whatever they may be. Okay, there's a lot of other questions on here, but this is getting to be a very long video. So I hope you guys like this. I know it's a little bit different from what I usually do and a little less organized and a little more ranty. So I hope you guys like this. Thank you so much for being part of the AENpeeps, for sharing your wellness journeys with me. This is truly my dream come true to be able to do this with you guys. And thank you for spreading the word. I mean, I get people all the time telling me that they're sharing my videos with their family members and their friends to be able to help them achieve their wellness goals. And that makes me so happy. So thank you guys for everything you do and being part of this community. And I'll see you guys in my next video.